Greetings to those of you who joined us online. Welcome. Our gang here at the temple is just rolling in for lunch right now. For those of you who are new to Topical Torah, our custom is for those who are here in person and for those of you at home, if you wish, 12 to 12:30 is a chance for lunch and a little pleasant conversation with one another. So the program actually begins at the bottom of the hour at 12:30. So if you don't already have a sandwich or something to drink, great time to head over to the kitchen, grab that, and to be ready for us to begin together programmatically at 12:30.
Iran, Iran, Syria.
aware from my own visit. Greetings to those of you who joined us online. Just wanted to quickly check in, make sure you're not wondering why you're not hearing anything, but you're seeing things. Our custom at Topical Torah is for lunch to take place from noon to 12:30, so go ahead and grab yourself a bite to eat. If you haven't already done so, that's certainly what the folks who are rolling in one by one to join us in person are doing. And at the bottom of the hour, about 23 minutes from now, we will begin our program together. Greetings to those of you who have joined us via our live stream. You're in the right place. This is Topical Torah. If you've just joined us, our custom at Topical Torah is, this is a lunch and learning session, so lunch comes first. Those who are coming here in person are lunching and conversing and enjoying each other's company, and we invite you, of course, to do the same. Grab a bite to eat, a little something to drink, and at 12:30, 18 minutes from now, our program will begin. lives right around the corner. And a lot of temple members kind of pass through all these little areas. We also have, we believe that our Pacific Palisades who are a little further east, the ones who live more like east of Chautauqua, we believe that their homes have survived. And I'm circling back to all of them now, but they're also friends. And just to make sure that they see their homes. We're trying. What I can tell you on that front is actually just yesterday, the leaders of Ken and I were working there. Looking at our site for possible use for preschool, religious school, other stuff. It's not just a matter of they are scouting locations, but on top of it, even if they loved our site and they felt like it would be really compatible for them. The problem is they don't even really know where to go yet because they're waiting at 100. Yeah, 100 of them. And so they're waiting to kind of see where are people landing. If there's a greater concentration of people down in Manhattan Beach, then they need a synagogue down there. That's going to accommodate them, not us. So they're right now just kind of getting the lay of the land, and I'm hoping that we may, possible, even before the end of the school year, we may have their preschool. We're trying everything we can to help them, and Pasadena Jewish Campus Center for that. Hello, everybody. We are still 11 minutes away from the beginning of our program. Topical Torah, you're in the right place. Make sure you're nourishing your body before we nourish your mind. At the bottom of the hour, 12:30 is when our program will begin. Welcome. No, the building incredibly survived. It's a lot like it was when we had our fire, where everything around it was burned, but the building was still standing. And so we're helping them, because we actually were in exactly that situation in 2017. Abigail's been working with their executive director to provide them with access to vendors, know-how. How do you remediate this? We had to take out 3 of the lawn from the temple for over a month. When they remediate smoke like that, they have to clean every surface with their stuff. They take out every book off the shelf and treat it. Every ceiling tile comes out and they treat it. Every piece of carpet on the floor. It's an unbelievable task. And an army of people in there for about a month when that fire happened. And bit by bit, when we came back in, because we had a preschool, a religious school, pretty big back then. directly SD5, but the fire would have to get over Lake Biscayne. And we're doing it to get there. We're gonna keep teaching, evolve, that's all. Yeah, if you know anybody who lives in Biscayne Village, they're under evacuation order right now. That's probably the residential area that is at first risk. Hi there, glad you're here. Welcome. Yes, I'm gonna give it to you. I brought copies just for those who want to look it over before we get rolling. Sure. I don't know. Anybody else want a copy of the read? Sure. What's that? This was to kind of, what I'm going to try to do is brief folks on both what's the nature of the deal, what were the politics that made it happen, and what are the politics that we should be looking for with regard to what the options of what comes next, including peace and not peace. That's my plan for presenting, and then we'll discuss. Yes, this is basically recapping what happened. Oh, I did not see that. Yeah, that's right. I doubt Israel's real popular now. Not surprised that we're having some success with the group. Hello, folks. For those of you who are with us online, welcome. We are almost at the beginning of our program. If you want to grab yourself a bite to eat or something to drink in these last 4 minutes before the bottom of the hour, that is when our, well, you can continue lunching while we're doing our program, but our time that's dedicated to lunch will end at 12:30, and that's when we'll initiate our program. So we'll be with you again in about 4 minutes. What I look for us to do in the 4 minutes that we've got left is, can we just do a quick go around and just make sure everybody is safe and I hope home. We've been doing our best to check in on all of our congregants who we know based on where their homes are, have been in harm's way. Sadly, a number of our members have lost their homes, but we're obviously trying to check in on everybody and get a sense of how things are going. So if you just, as we go around the for one night. We've evacuated twice before when we were actually under evacuation order. This time we just evacuated on the first of the two Friday nights of this period because we were leaving services. If any of you were live streaming or were with us in person, it was a very unsettling moment. We had just finished, Rabbi Goldberg had just finished this beautiful sermon, and I got up, we had planned that I was going to follow up with this piece of music that was going to be really sort of perfect coda for what his message was. And I'm literally leaning in, about to do my thing, and everybody's phone goes off. Yeah, I mean, all of them. So I was like, that's all of us. But anyway, took off the guitar. Well, we made Alenu and Kaddish, and we're going to go take the Torahs out here. And because when we got out to the parking lot, all our cars were covered in ash. At that point, the wind was pushing the fire pretty hard in this direction. No, greetings, everybody. It is 12:30, and we're delighted to have you with us. A number of you contacted me and told me that you'd be joining us via the live stream, and so we're delighted to have you with us. It is so important right now for us to be making community with one another. I think it has been a start to 2025 that has, even in the company of others, helped us or forced us to feel a little bit more alone, just smaller against the overwhelming forces of nature. And so with all of that said, it feels really, really great to be here at the temple in person with all of you who are able to actually make the schlep to Leo Beck, and via extension with all of you who are joining us on live stream. Some of you not even from in town, but able to join us. That's the great benefit ever since this program switched to including live streamers too. We can have Topical Torah participants from far and wide. And so we're delighted to have you all with us here today. Here is what I am hoping to do. I hope that those of you who are with us online will have access as well, either in advance of this gathering or if you want to flip through it while I'm making my presentation. The printed materials that we've shared here in the room were actually shared via a link in the email that came to you, I believe, on Monday. That was the This Week at Leo Beck Temple email, laid out all the programming for the week. And for Wednesday, it indicated the Topical Torah, indicated the topic, and a little description of what I was hoping to do with this session, and it included a link to the reading material. I'm not going to be directly walking through the reading material, but if you want to reference it, it is certainly, it's valuable in terms of getting us a clear foundation of what is the deal and how did the deal take place. I am going to try to explain that not directly from these texts, but I'm going to try to explain it a little bit through everything else that I've read, the following of this process, obviously, for the past 16 months, and a little bit from my own sources and contacts in Israel and in the scholarship community about Israel. So that's what I'd like to share with you. I hope it will be not only an introduction to how the Israeli political system works, how it is working in this moment. You take those fundamentals and you apply them to this moment. What is that looking like? And then obviously all of this for the purpose of having a greater understanding as we watch the next 5 weeks unfold. What does the future portend? Is there a realistic hope that this might be the end of the war? Is the war certain to resume? What happens? What are the political factors that will dictate those outcomes? That's what I'm hoping to ensure that we all kind of have a basic understanding of before this afternoon is through, so that as you're watching these weeks up ahead, you'll be able to kind of decipher what is taking place in the news. So with all that said, let me begin by just sharing a few words about the deal itself. Let me explain. A few of us were kind of informally talking about this over lunch, but I want to make sure everybody kind of has the same information. The information here has been readily available in the news, but it's important as a factor in our watching over the next few weeks where things go following, and not even only following. The reality is the ceasefires fall apart. There was a ceasefire on October 6th, 2023. So there's no guarantee that we get through this 6-week period, but certainly we hope and pray that we will, and I think there are political reasons that make it likely that we will. The first phase of the ceasefire deal began this past Sunday. It was actually ratified officially on Friday, and some of you probably started following the news about it even in the middle part of the week, especially because as the word was leaking out that the ceasefire was likely to happen, or was at least gaining steam, you had the first rejection of its possibility by one of the most right-lurching elements of the Israeli government. So I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. The deal started on Sunday. It is scheduled to last for, as I said, a 6-week period, during which the basic fundamentals will be, when it's all over, assuming that it all happens, 33 Israeli hostages will have been released. Those 33, there's no absolute clarity that they will all be living hostages, but Israel's language in making the deal was that there's obviously a supreme favoring of living hostages being released in the first stages of the deal over hostages, the remains of hostages being returned. And so far, 3 hostages have been released, all living, all young women, and all of this is going to take place in exchange for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, some of whom are really not much more than hostages. They are, if you read some of the stories, there's not really a great claim for many of them having been imprisoned, and some of them are violent criminals, and there's no other way to put it. Some of them are violent terrorists with blood on their hands. So you've got a range of all of that in there, and invariably the negotiation required some measure of both, as is always the case with these types of negotiations. We all remember, I don't know if we all remember, but certainly many of us remember the negotiation for the release of Gilad Shalit after all those years of his captivity. 1,000 prisoners went home, again, many of whom were folks who really were wrongly imprisoned without any due process, without any opportunity to really plead their case. But then there were some real problem people in there, including one Yahya Sinwar, who was the architect of October 7th, killed during the war. By the time that he launched that attack, he was actually the on-the-ground head of Hamas, and he was released as one of 1,000 in exchange for Shalit. And so this is always, when you know things like that, it becomes an important cloud that hovers over these negotiations, because there's always a tremendous priority in getting the hostages released, not just for reasons of emotion, for reasons of the Jewish tradition. The freeing of captives is considered one of the foremost mitzvot in our tradition. It is prayed for regularly in morning prayers, whether there are hostages that have been taken by the Palestinians and Israelis. I'm talking about in the morning prayers for hundreds and hundreds, even thousands of years. And so this is a religious imperative in our people, in our tradition, the release of the hostages, and invariably some complicated deals are made in order to make that happen, sometimes ones that end up resulting in even greater harm. This is the complexity of the matter. If those 6 weeks come off as planned, the second phase of the ceasefire is to take place over another 6 weeks. And that would see the remainder of the hostages released home, living and dead, all of them, and a full withdrawal of Israeli troops from Gaza, so an end to the war. This deal really painfully, some of you read the email that I sent right when the deal was announced, and you could probably sense my irritation in the message that I wrote, because the deal is really, in its essence, the same as the deal that was offered, architected under the Biden administration in May. And so when you think about everything that's taken place since May, in terms of the loss of Israeli captives, in terms of the loss of Israeli soldiers, in terms of the loss of hundreds, maybe even thousands of additional innocent Gazan civilians, all of the additional suffering, the starvation, the humanitarian crisis, all of these things that have taken place, and the same deal is effectively ratified, I guess, May, so you're talking 8 months later, the same deal. It's extremely angering. And then there are those who will point their finger and say, Biden offered it. The looming reality of Trump coming into office got it done. I think it's hard to argue against that. And no matter how you may feel about Donald Trump, the reality is they're all petrified of him over there on both sides. And that is a huge factor in what took place. Some of you, I'm sure, had the same reaction that my wife and I did as this was all going down. It smelled a lot like 1981, didn't it? Reminds you an awful lot of Jimmy Carter doing all of, literally, sleepless night after sleepless night, trying to negotiate to get the Iranian hostages home, and them literally coming home as Ronald Reagan was being inaugurated. This had a very similar type of vibe to it. Now, critics of Netanyahu, including the overwhelming majority of all the hostage families, and by that I don't only mean the families of the 98 who still are, I guess now 95, who still remain, but all of those who suffered through the hostage crisis with their loved ones. They are certainly chief among the critics of Netanyahu. All of his critics have long accused him of sabotaging those past efforts, right? So here's Biden attempting to make a deal, and that he did not have the political strength, Biden, to be able to effectively force Netanyahu's hand into agreeing to the deal. Itamar Ben-Gvir, who I'm going to talk about a little bit more in a few minutes, the one Israeli cabinet minister who he and his party have left the coalition over the deal, he confirmed, if you were watching during these months going, well, but it looks like the Biden administration has offered a really acceptable deal. Both sides have to swallow some bitter pills, but it's the kind of deal that leads to peace. Why is it not happening? Well, those who are the staunchest defenders not only of Netanyahu, but of just wanting to believe that Israel wanted the peace and that maybe it was the terrorists who didn't want the peace. You had two ways to look at that, right? It's, oh, well, Hamas doesn't want peace. They've got the hostages. That's their MO. And then there were those who were saying it's Netanyahu actually who is the force stopping this from actually happening. Ben-Gvir, as he stepped out of the government, seemed to confirm the suspicions of those who believe that Hamas was actually happy to deal, and that it was in fact the Israeli government that forced those 8 months of additional suffering and dying to take place. He asserted that he and Bezalel Smotrich, the leader of the other furthest right-leaning element of the coalition, again, we're going to talk about these elements in a few moments, that he and Smotrich had used their political leverage to thwart this deal time after time over the past year by threatening leaving the coalition. And so he basically came out and said the quiet part out loud, which is Netanyahu was not going to make this deal if it was going to imperil him politically. And of course, to this day, Netanyahu and his loyalists will tell you that it's those awful people of Hamas and they're awful people. So it's always hard to know who to trust when you're talking about non-trustworthy elements. Netanyahu continues to say, we were happy to make peace. We're all about peace. It was the terrorists of Hamas who wouldn't do so. I want to make sure that we all understand the political math in Israel. This is a fundamental to understanding this moment. So many of you will already know, I'm going to do this as briefly as I can. Many of you will already know some of this, but for those who don't, I want to make sure we're all on equal footing. The Israeli government is a parliamentary democracy, much more like European-style democracies than American democracy. As a result, there have always been multiple parties standing in every election, and there is generally an electoral threshold, a percentage of the vote that a party has to win in order to get any representation in the parliament, which is known as the Knesset in Israel. How many seats in the Knesset? 120. I knew there'll be some of you who could probably give this little piece of my speech for me, but I'm going to go ahead and finish it up on my own behalf. So, 120 seats in the Israeli Knesset. So if there's a electoral threshold presently the electoral threshold, it's moved around some over the years. It is presently 3.25%. If your party stands for election and it comes up with 3.24% of the vote, you get 0 seats. Doesn't matter that you've got 3% of the vote. You don't get 3% of the parliament. You get 0. Once you clear 3.25%, your party will be represented in the Knesset, and now it's a horse trading game to get to putting together a coalition. 120 seats. How many seats do you need to have a government? 61, right? You have to control a majority of them. Now, if it's you don't have a government. The horse trading has to continue. The question was, what do you do if there's only 60? 60 is not enough. You have to be able to, at minimum, reach 61 to form a government. And there have been times in the past where they've gotten to 60, but not to 61. Also worth pointing out, just as in terms of understanding kind of historically this math, even in the heyday of the Israeli left, the labor movement, which controlled the government for the first several decades of Israel's existence, it was one labor party government after another. Never has any one party won 61 seats. Again, it's a parliamentary style, and there are just so many parties out there, and this happens in other parliamentary countries as well. Maybe you'd be fully supportive of the labor government, but you're wanting them to lean more left, so you vote for the Meretz party, which is further left than the Labor Party. Ultimately, you're happy to make common cause, but you cast your vote with the party that is most aligned. And some of these parties are really single-issue parties. There have been parties that were just about dealing with one particular economic issue, or a party that's just about repressing the overly favored status of the ultra-Orthodox. There have been parties that pop up for particular political issues, and so people vote for them, hoping to get some influence, some extra heft behind that issue by getting them into the coalition. So you've never had just a party win the election the way you have in the United States, and then they control the government. They always have to do some horse trading, and the minute you get into a coalition, of course, you are having to make compromises in order to ensure that these various party elements remain in the government, because once enough of them leave, saying we're not getting enough of what we came into the government for, we're going to join the opposition. If the number drops below 61, government's gone and new elections are called, even if it's before the election period. And this has happened many, many times. Most recently, of course, there were 5 elections in a row to get to this current government that was elected at the end of 2022. So that is basically the political math of how Israel works. So in this moment, the government of Netanyahu, when it was originally elected, was a government formed with 62 seats. So we're talking about there have been some governments that had, in the 70s and even in the 80s, large majorities that becomes very hard to bring them down, because even if a party with a significant number of seats leaves, you're still over the threshold. When you form a government with 62, you are dancing on a higher wire from the minute you show up to work. Who was in the 62 is very important to understand in order to understand this moment. So let me tell you who was in the 62 that formed the current government. Acknowledging before I do so that there's been some migration during the time of this government. We'll talk about that too. But I want you to know who made up the government that Bibi Netanyahu regained power with at the end of 2022. Well, so first, of course, was his own party, the Likud party, which has been the long-time right-center party of Menachem Begin, of Yitzhak Shamir, of Ariel Sharon. You think of the right-leaning, the normative right-leaning politicians, whether you liked them or you were a supporter of them or an opponent of them, they were your sort of secular, sort of mainstream right-of-center party. Your Israel's version of the Republicans. At least the Republicans as you might have remembered them before this particular administration. So that's Likud. And they had the largest, that's why he was given the first opportunity to put together a coalition, because usually the coalition is formed by whoever's party of the bunch had the largest number of seats in the Knesset. So Likud, I don't actually remember the number of seats Likud won in this last election. I thought it was a little less than that. I think it was in the low 30s, I think. In any case, it was far away from 61, so there was going to need to be a lot of horse trading to make a coalition. In that group of parties, you had Shas. Shas is a party of Haredi Jews, ultra-Orthodox Jews. They are representing the Sephardic Mizrahi wing of ultra-Orthodoxy. You had United Torah Judaism in the coalition. They are a Haredi party. They are religious, social conservatives, but economically somewhat center-left. But when it comes to all the religious and social issues that are driving relations with Israel's neighbors, very much hard-right Haredi party. You had Noam. This is a party that is far-right, Orthodox, religious Zionists as well. Its main issue, it's a little more single issue. I shouldn't say it's entirely single issue. It is also far-right, Orthodox, ultra-religious, like all the other parties I've already named. But they have a particular fixation on the LGBTQ community. They see them as the source of the destruction of the family. And so the reason that they're not in with all the other ultra-Orthodox, ultra-conservative parties is they're the main address for if you really, really hate gays and lesbians. That's where to go. So they're in the coalition. You have the National Religious Party. They are far-right religious Zionist party as well. And they are the party that is led by the current finance minister of Israel, Bezalel Smotrich, about whom we have talked a lot over the last couple of years, about whom you have heard me speak on High Holy Days. He and the leader of the last party that was a part of the coalition, and that is Otzma Yehudit. That is Hebrew for the Jewish Power Party. They are far-right, ultra-nationalists, Kahanists. They are the descendants of Meir Kahane, who in the 1980s was such a vicious terrorist that Kahanists were barred from the Israeli government. They were not seen as a legitimate right-wing entity. They were seen as terrorists and criminals, and so they shouldn't be in government. Well, their ideological descendants, in fact, really, I mean, they are direct descendants. Kahane is their hero and their sort of ideological master. Their party is led by, until just this week, the Minister of National Security for Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir, a very, very proud racist. I say this because I'm not disparaging him in his view. He is proud. The party's ideology is anti-Arab racism. And so he was put in charge of the police. And it was his party that ultimately, the only one that left as a result of the ceasefire deal. But hold on just one moment. What I want to add, those were the 62, what I just walked you through. So you're talking about Likud being really kind of the only, for lack of a better term, sane right-wing party. You're talking about they are kind of a normative Israeli party, and then an entire coalition made up of right-wing religious fanatics. That's the government. So, for much of the war, the coalition had grown. Many of you know that the coalition gained 8 seats when some of the opposition leaders, names like Benny Gantz, names like Gadi Eisenkot, these are some of the folks who were in what became the war cabinet. And so you'd read online, the war cabinet is making a decision about this or that, should they go into Rafah, these kinds of decisions. This was an attempt to kind of create something of a national unity government while the war was going on. So these are folks who were definitely major opponents of Netanyahu's. They were mostly other sane center-right people, but they wanted nothing to do with this government until the war was underway, and they wanted to have some voice in hopefully moderating this government. And so the deal that they made was they would be included in a war cabinet, and they would bring their parties into a national unity government. As they began to as they began to openly deny that there was any military reason for continuing the war, you probably started to notice when some of these folks started speaking up, including some in Netanyahu's own party. Yoav Gallant ultimately got fired because he's a Likud member of the war cabinet saying there's no military reason for us to be killing these people anymore. There's no gain to be achieved by our doing it, so he got thrown out. When some of these folks who I just named started getting hip to the idea that we were now having war for war's own sake, they departed the coalition. This was in June of 2024. So coalition grew, shrunk down again. There's another party that's important in this drama, and that party is known as the New Hope Party. They are a right-wing, national liberal Zionist party. You may be thinking to yourself, national liberal, what is that? Again, when you have a lot of different kinds of parties, a national liberal party, and you see this there's some national liberal parties also in European countries, usually are liberal on some either social or economic types of matters, but they are nationalist parties. And so the New Hope Party is a right-wing, national liberal Zionist party. It joined the unity government as well, so the size of the government swelled to over 70 seats during that time. They joined as part of the influx inward, but they left in March of 2024 when the party's leader, Gideon Sa'ar, was not invited to be a part of the war cabinet. So he took his party out of the government, but horse trading continued, and in September of 2024, they returned to the coalition. Why? Because Sa'ar was named the foreign minister of Israel. So you can see how there's just a lot of sort of smoke-filled room dealing that is done for Netanyahu to keep that number over 60, whatever it takes. So they came back in. So where does this all leave us? Now I want to help with the math of having described all that. That gave Bibi Netanyahu 68 seats at the time that this deal was negotiated last week, or finalized. It had been negotiated 8 months before. He had 68 seats until Itamar Ben-Gvir pulled his lunatic party out of the coalition. So that dropped it back down to 62 again. Now he was able to do that Netanyahu was able to make the deal knowing, well, if Ben-Gvir leaves, I still got 62. So I can make this deal. And I can please the Trump administration, the incoming Trump administration, by making this deal. What he couldn't afford was for both Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, who controls the National Religious Party, they couldn't both leave. That gets you under the number. So what happened? First, you have Ben-Gvir pulling his party out of the coalition. He offers, standing offer, to rejoin the coalition if Netanyahu will resume the war after the 6 weeks are over. So long as Netanyahu will abandon the deal after its first phase, he's happy to come back in and ride herd over the police again and bring his 6 votes along with him. Smotrich is every bit as diabolical and every bit as opposed to the ceasefire deal, but he remained in the coalition. He did so only on Netanyahu's promise to resume the war after the first phase. So right now, you've got a 62-vote coalition that is predicated on abandoning the ceasefire that he himself agreed to. Public information. No, this is not a secret. Yes? We're going to talk about that. Yeah. We're going to get, so incidentally, I'm going to ask that if there are questions or comments, we probably need to switch these microphones on, and I just want to make sure so that way the folks on screen can hear your comments. I'll just quickly repeat. Some folks are kind of asking the question, number one, is this a matter of public record? Yes, everything I'm telling you is a matter of public record. You can find it easily online in the New York Times or in the Times of Israel or in Haaretz or any of the normative media. The question about whether some of the opposition parties might help to prop up the government in order to keep the deal going forward in the event that Smotrich carries out on his threat to leave. yes, some of that is also out there in the ether. So there's this weird dance, right? What's the best way for Netanyahu to remain in power? So hold that for just a moment. I just want to kind of quickly walk through the rest of this. So what you've got right now is Ben Gvir out of the government, back down to 62 seats, a knowledge that Smotrich will, again, is he threatening? Does he actually mean this? Will he leave the government? Does he actually believe that he's better off forcing new elections? Some of these lunatic parties believe that they're going to do better in the next election and have more power in the government, not less. And so they're perfectly fine with forcing new elections. In a moment, we'll talk about why Bibi Netanyahu not so fine with forcing new elections. So if Smotrich leaves and no other parties ride to the rescue, you will fall underneath the threshold. Just so you know, Ben Gvir and Smotrich's parties exist for the purpose not only of continuing the war, but for Israel to resettle Gaza. The idea is that there should just be no hope whatsoever of Palestinian self-determination on any of the land. That even includes Gaza, which Ariel Sharon, no less than Ariel Sharon, a famed right-wing leader of Israel, took Israel out of Gaza. These guys want us to be back in Gaza. So, Netanyahu may be faced with a fateful choice in the politically precarious weeks that lie ahead. He will either have to maintain the choice of maintaining his parliamentary majority by resuming the fight against Gaza, or against Hamas in Gaza, or risk the collapse of his coalition only halfway through its 4-year term and gamble on early elections. So quickly, a word about Netanyahu's desperation to retain political power. Most of you already know this, but he's not just interested in power for its own sake. There have been plenty of diabolical politicians who have been motivated by that. His desire to retain power has everything to do with staying out of jail. This should be something that is familiar to us here in the United States of America. So he is battling corruption charges right now as we speak. He's literally facing trial presently. And so that lengthy trial is presently ongoing and is independent of all of this. But in addition to that, you have whatever segment of the Israeli population that will be very animated, and it's hard to know what that percentage would be. Back in November of 2023, it was everybody. Now, hard to know. What part of the population, once there's a new election that's going to take place, is going to bring about a public reckoning for October 7th having happened at all, right? You know, there's just, in the same way as time becomes something of an ameliorator and new evidence becomes something of an ameliorator in any government, that's the animating question here. What will be the size and expanse and vote changing impact of the public reckoning that will take place about all those people being attacked in their homes and no Israeli military or police coming to the rescue? Just silence for hours and hours on end until one by one they went into the safe rooms and found all these people. What will the price be to pay for that is the big unknown question mark. So, why might Netanyahu end the war? This is partly to your question before. What would be the factors that would lead to Netanyahu actually carrying forward on the deal and honoring it to its conclusion, including the conclusion of the war? There are analysts who will say that ending the conflict in Gaza is actually the better option for Netanyahu. First off, there are those who see it as a political matter. They're like, elections are always about telling a story, a particular kind of story. And there are those who are telling Netanyahu right now, what a story you'll have to tell. We were attacked. I alone can protect you. Look at what took place. We brought not only Gaza to its knees, but we brought Hezbollah to its knees. We brought Iran to its knees. Iran hasn't been weaker in decades than it is right now. What an extraordinary march to peace through war, but march to peace I have shepherded. What a story to tell in an election. So there are those who kind of see it as a politically not only survivable, but perhaps even advantageous time to go and try to get a full new 4-year term, as opposed to trying to ride out these two and hope that you can kind of keep the thing glued together with spit and chewing gum. It is true, incredibly, that Benjamin Netanyahu's popularity has risen as Israel has brought Gaza and Hezbollah and Iran to its knees. On one level, it's not that incredible. I mean, weren't you yourself kind of, whether you thought it was a good thing or a bad thing, you had to be awed by some of what you started seeing happen in the news, right? Of when Iran sent all of that weaponry through the air and Israel, with the help of its neighbors and the United States, shot it all down. When Ismail Haniyeh was assassinated in Iran with an explosive device placed in a room years before that no one ever detected, such that they could remotely explode him when he went in the room, and they actually knew when he went in the room. So you're talking about a level of military intelligence that will blow the mind. And that's to say nothing of the walkie-talkies and the pagers up in Lebanon, right? So all of us, some of you are like, it was great. Okay, I hear you. Okay, some of you are probably horrified by these things. I get there's a diversity of opinion, but however you may have felt about that as a means of war, the fact that it was possible, I mean, I'm sure you reached the same conclusion that I did, which is no other country in the world, including our own, could pull that off. It's just an astonishing accomplishment of military intelligence, whether you like it or not. So, it is on the back of that he has seen his popularity rise. It all happened on his watch. I don't think Bibi Netanyahu had a whole lot to do with it, but he was the one with his hand on the gears at the time that all of that took place, and the prime minister should get both blame and credit when things happen under his government. And so, yes, his popularity has risen. Has it risen enough to offset that public reckoning? That's the giant question mark, and there are those who are saying, yes, this would be actually a wise time. Upon winning this war, declare victory, go to elections. That's a smart move for you. Moreover, it's a smart move for you on the international front. Why? Because Donald Trump has been perfectly clear that he wants this war to end. And, of course, the first Trump administration brokered the Abraham Accords, brokered the normalization of diplomatic ties between Israel and 3 different Arab countries, the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, all during the first Trump administration. Israelis now have their eye on, frankly, the type of normalization that was what led Hamas to do what it did on October 7th. That was to prevent Israel normalizing relationship with Saudi Arabia. And we all know the Trump administration's got no problem with MBS and the Saudis. Perfectly, in fact, his son-in-law, Kushner, is doing business in the billions with the Saudis. So there's no moral, ethical dilemma as the Saudis are concerned. And incidentally, in the Middle East, you are usually choosing between multiple bad options. And the Saudis, bad option A, are fiercely opposed to the Iranians, bad option B. And it probably makes a lot of sense to attach yourself to the least bad of the bad options available. And this is certainly where the Trump administration comes down, the Saudis being the least bad for sure. And so an arrangement that would strengthen the regional access against the arch enemy Iran will please the Trump administration to no end. And this is why they want an end to the war. They don't care one iota for the Gazans, but they want an end to the war for the reasons of what can be politically achieved. Please grab a microphone if you're going to make a comment. Yep. Hold on one sec. Yeah. Yeah, but ask it on mic so the folks on the screen can hear you. Go ahead and switch the mic on and ask your question on the microphone.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
You gotta get a little-
before the war, before October 7th,
I don't know if it's on. Yeah. It is, yeah.
before October 7th,
Yes.
there was a path forward where Hamas was considered acceptable as a negotiating partner.
Yeah.
who would be negotiating further steps forward? Is it
that
Hamas or is
you're asking the elusive what's the day after question. And there's no clear answer to that. Netanyahu is resistant at all corners really talking about what is the future of Gaza and the West Bank, because he would like it to, in order to assuage the people who he does business with these days. Oh, Hamas has been the negotiating partner in this deal. I would imagine until such time as there's peace. I mean, they're the party that holds the hostages, so they're the only people you can do business with. If you want them to release the hostages, you got to do business with them. Certainly, Israel is not itching to have a long-term relationship with Hamas and is preparing to, obviously, whatever tomorrow might look like, it wouldn't be led by Hamas. And Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are all about the war continues until Hamas is finished, which, of course, is Hamas as an idea. There are new Hamasniks being grown as we speak, and so you can't kill Hamas. All you can do is kill the people who are presently in Hamas, only for them to be replaced by the next people who will be in Hamas. As to whether or not Hamas will rule in Gaza, that's a different question to be determined. But at the moment, yes, that's the negotiating partner. Yes, go ahead, Gary.
If there's been a presumptive promise from Netanyahu already to not proceed with phase two, my understanding of agreements is that if you express your intention not to comply with it in its entirety, why should Hamas from the beginning consider that the thing hasn't been breached already and refuse to release the rest of the hostages?
They certainly could, and incidentally, one possibility here is that Hamas breaches either is the initiating breacher of the agreement or feels like it has already been breached, and so they're not going to honor it. This is the risk that Netanyahu takes. Remember, when I say that this is publicly available information, what I mean is, it's not like Bibi Netanyahu stepped in front of a microphone and said, I am planning to abrogate the second phase of the deal. What he's done is he's done whatever it was necessary to do in order to keep Smotrich from stepping out of the government, or else new elections would happen before the deal would happen. Here instead, the deal is happening before the new elections. And incidentally, politicians do sometimes lie.
No.
And
Really?
it is entirely possible that Netanyahu has lied to either party. He's clearly double dealing on this. And it is also possible, one of the other factors here, is that Smotrich is lying. Maybe Smotrich hasn't done the same calculation that Itamar Ben-Gvir has done and feels like he's better off in this government than he is outside of it. Before we jump into all the questions, I do want to just finish. Right now, I've laid out for you why Netanyahu might end the war. I haven't had a chance to lay out for you yet why he might not end the war. So the fundamentals of why he might complete the deal. Number one, he gets convinced that it's the political moment. This is the time to turn 4 years into 6, and that he can win, and that he will win. And certainly what took place on November 5th, 2024 in the United States would probably lead him to feel a lot more confident in that sort of thing. A guy who was in similar legal hot water, who was attached to some things that felt like they were politically radioactive, he could never recover politically, won bigger his second time than he did the first time. So that's the kind of thing that leads a Bibi Netanyahu to think maybe this is a good time. So he's getting that kind of advice, and the impact of the Trump administration wanting the war to be over is a huge factor that might lead Netanyahu to finish the deal, even where there are some political risks involved. This is why some think that there is more chance that Netanyahu chooses Saudi Arabia and elections over Smotrich and continuing the war. That's kind of a choice. Why might he resume the war? So some of this is just the inverse of everything I just said, right? His trial is ongoing, so he could face judgment while he's out of office, or only running a caretaker government once elections get called. He's still effectively the prime minister, but he doesn't have the same kind of powers that he did once he's got a minority government, and so that becomes a giant risk in the run-up to the elections. Does he really believe that war and peace. I was the prime minister of war, and now look, I'm the one who won the peace. Can that message be successfully sold in the face of the public reckoning for October 7th? If he doesn't believe, or if he's at least fearful enough that it might not win today, then better to take the 2 years you got than hope for an additional 4 years you don't have. The bird in the hand versus the two in the bush, so to speak. This is why some analysts are believing that he will opt to scuttle the deal, the second phase of the deal, if Hamas has not already done so first, what Gary was talking about, in order to keep his coalition intact. And to be honest, while I'm sure some of you are hearing all of this and thinking this is a right moment for him to become king of Israel, there's very little about Benjamin Netanyahu's past that suggests that he would choose to go to elections that he might not win. He usually is pretty determined to, he's the kind of gambler who likes betting on sure things. You know how, the gambler who bets on sporting events that he's already fixed? That's the reason why I'm betting on it, because I know what the outcome's going to be. That's kind of the Bibi Netanyahu way, especially after he got thrown out of office and took 5 elections to get him back into office. It would be a personality, it would test an established personality trait for him to say, I'm going to risk 2 years that I've already got in order to try to turn him into 6. So, or into 4, wouldn't be 6, would be 4. Are there any other escape hatches for Netanyahu? This is what you were pointing to a little bit earlier. First, some think that he could still reach some other kind of understanding with Smotrich. Not with Ben-Gvir, who already left, but with Smotrich, who's still in and is every bit the lunatic that Ben-Gvir is. We have no idea if Smotrich is the one who's lying. I promise that I will take us out of this government if they don't, resume the war. Well, we only really know if he means that when they don't resume the war. And so is it possible that something's going on that we don't know about in public knowledge between Netanyahu and Smotrich to keep this spit and chewing gum that makes 62 continue to exist? That we don't know. That's the kind of thing we should be watching for in the news as things are going forward over the next several weeks. And then there's this part about even if Smotrich joins Ben-Gvir in leading the coalition, Netanyahu could, at least for a short while, probably for a short while, hang on as a head of a minority government with the imprimatur of some of the left of center parties that are so interested in peace taking place that they would be willing to prop him up long enough to complete the deal. Trouble with that arrangement is they're not likely to prop him up too much after the deal has been completed, and once the hostages come home, it's very hard to imagine the Labor Party or any of the other center-right parties that are dreaming of getting Benjamin Netanyahu permanently out of government and into jail. It's very hard to imagine very many of them being willing to do that for very long. So Netanyahu knows this. He might, so think about that calculus, right? Now you got Netanyahu thinking, well, I have to dance to Trump's tune. That has a huge amount of gain in it for me. So I probably need to end this war. And I probably can do the end of the war by getting support from parties that hate me, but want the war to end. And the Israeli people want the war to end. So I'd have that working for me. And then I go to elections, and at least I have Trump in my back pocket. And yeah, it's a bit of a roll of the dice, but is that maybe my best play? You can see how this is like 3D chess for Benjamin Netanyahu in this moment. So to conclude.
One other factor.
Yes.
In his mind, he sees a big.
Yeah. Yeah, switch it on. You can leave it on.
In his mind.
Oh, it's that on. There's a little switch there. You'll see the little light come on. There you go.
In his mind, he sees Elon Musk giving money and support to the neo-Nazi Germans and to Trump, and he says, "Well, I may have a great big financial backing in my election."
The oligarchic leanings of the current American government are definitely a factor here. In the same way, I mean, the reason surprised no one's asked yet. I've been asked by every congregant I come by, what do you think about this? What was it?
Yeah.
I'm getting that question a lot these days, as you might imagine. And some of you probably saw the ADL tweet a rather forceful, shockingly forceful defense of Musk. It's not all that shocking when you consider that the ADL really likes what Trump is doing about Israel. And so it doesn't want to cross Trump, just like all the billionaires don't want to cross Trump. So that's a factor there. But it is I'll say for my part, if I were the one writing the ADL's tweet, which I think might be right, just so you know, that is to say, I am not 100% certain that that was an attempt to, let's announce that the Nazi Party has come to power and it's Heil Hitler except it's Trump. It's possible that that's what happened there. Obviously, it's possible. I mean, that's,
He may have just been turning on all Teslas.
I mean, when it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it could be a duck. It could also be a waterfowl. You can call it what you will. What I'm here to say to you is, I actually believe, and some of you know this, I'm not proud of it anymore, but it just happened. It was not something we were seeking. The temple, one of its sources of revenue, is occasionally renting. Somebody wants to do an event, renting.
What?
They'll do a rental event on our property. People
Boring.
rent it to do a bar mitzvah. It's not a
Boring
Kohen temple.
company.
Well, the Boring Company, back when Musk was seen as a tremendous guy who was all about saving the environment and made amazing cars and was building tunnels for transportation in the city of Los Angeles to be greater than it's ever been and sending people to the, well, the Boring Company contacted us and wanted to stage an event at Leo Beck Temple. This was back like a long time ago, 2015, 2016, something like that, long time ago. So back when everybody was out buying their Tesla and feeling unbelievably like, oh my God, thank God for Elon Musk, right? So lo and behold, Elon Musk has been to Leo Beck Temple, believe it or not. We had the event. I was there just to make sure there was no mayhem. I was not involved. It wasn't like I was on the program introducing anybody or anything like that. I was just sitting in the crowd. A couple of things about that night that were very creepy. One of them was they came in and they basically, their rental, they asked to use the room. They didn't necessarily tell us what they were going to do with the room. The sanctuary and social hall were opened up together, and so this was a big crowd of people who came, and you just wouldn't recognize that it was our bima. I mean, the bima basically disappeared. It was a stage, and everything behind it that, like, things like arcs and eternal lights and all that kind of stuff just vanished. They didn't take them out. They just covered them up, and it just, it was the Boring Company. And his fans at that time were really cultists. It was a fascinating thing. I had not ever seen behind that curtain before. And he came out and he spoke as a part of the program.
An hour late.
Yeah, only a small part of the program. And the handful of us from the temple who ran the temple at that time, president of the temple at the time, me, executive director, we met him. And what I can tell you from having met Elon Musk is he's probably exactly what you would expect. He is a phenomenally uncomfortable human being. Like, he's just
ADD.
really awkward, definitely on the spectrum. I don't know where on it, probably pretty far along on it. It's a part of his genius. Guy is obviously a genius. I mean, look at what he's created. And even if you think much of what he has created or even all of what he created is diabolical, the capacity to create this world where he effectively has purchased the President of the United States, that is an accomplishment no one has ever achieved in human history. So while no one invented cars like that either, I mean, the guy is a pretty extraordinary inventor of reality and also normative inventions. To meet him, you would never guess it, because he's just a awkward, really uncomfortable, basically shy person who has a hard time looking you in the eye and having a conversation with you. So I think it is entirely possible. This is not me saying this is what I think happened. I'm saying I think it is entirely possible that the ADL was right. That he was just, it finally actually happened. I own the President of the United States. And then he got really excited, and he's a painfully awkward guy, and that it ended up looking an awful lot like a Nazi salute. But what it mostly was just him freaking out with unbridled joy. This is not me saying that's what I think happened. It's me saying I think it's possible that happened. Which is why if I were writing for the ADL, with an eye to the future, just in case I happen to be wrong, that tweet's going to age real badly. If the Anti-Defamation League tweeted out, "You have nothing to worry about, let's give the benefit of the doubt, that's not a Nazi salute." I would not be declaring it's not a Nazi salute at the time that it happened. I would be saying, let's all take a deep breath, recognizing that we should be watching real carefully because of stuff like this. Let us hope that it was a simple moment of zeal unbridled, but let us be vigilant in watching what the future. This is what I would have loved to have heard from the ADL, but feel as you may about the ADL, it has its own political interests in not crossing the 47th President of the United States. So this is to Alan's point about how does this intersect with our topic here today. Because I don't really want to go off on a whole side conversation about Musk's moment. I think that Alan's point is valid. The issue of the billionaires, particularly Musk, but not only Musk, and the way in which there is now just an absolute, complete through line between the money and its power over the power. It's not about greed anymore. Now the greed is about power and direct power. And so that's a factor as well. For sure, Netanyahu was trying to calculate all that. So here you've got Netanyahu, and then I really want to, the rest of this would be for us to discuss, having to decide between his parliamentary majority and his relationship with the Trump administration, with Trump and Saudi Arabia perhaps offering him the opportunity to make a legacy like he's only dared to dream of. And if he has to choose between an intimate relationship with the Trump administration and Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, is he going to opt for Trump? Even at the expense of facing the voters again? He certainly, Trump is a much greater power than Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, so that would seem like yes, but he has to face the voters again. That would seem like no. Critics of his government have accused him of sabotaging his deal in order to preserve his coalition at all expenses. Now the rubber meets the road, and we're about to find out after these 6 weeks are up, or maybe even during the 6 weeks, but certainly no later than the expiry of the 6 weeks, which is only 5 weeks from now. Watch your news carefully. This is the lens through which I would be interpreting everything that you see developing in the news up ahead, and for those who have their own intel, other sources, people you've heard from or read, that you think can help us to understand what to expect, this is a great time to share it or to ask your questions with the remainder of our time. We have a good chunk of time to discuss. Judy, I saw your hand up first, so go right ahead. I think it's on. Let's just make sure both the mics are on so we can just pass
Hello,
it around.
is that on?
Yes.
You're on, yeah.
Okay, so I think many people here have heard Ambassador Ross talk and what he said about what's happening and the agreement that had been put forth like a year ago, same agreement. And the difference is, according to what I understood he said, was that they know that Hamas has been degraded, that their leadership has been killed. They also know that, you can't totally wipe them out, but you can keep them degraded. And he thinks that the agreement's going to go ahead for many reasons. One is Qatar and Saudi Arabia. I mean, that's pretty strong influence on the Arab nations, right? And Saudi Arabia does want to go ahead with the Abraham Accords. So I thought what he said, and if you hadn't heard it on Judge, watch it, because I think what he said was very meaningful, and it pertains to what you're talking about today.
Yeah, so it sounds like Ambassador Ross basically sees the prism as the same prism the same prism I am presenting to you today. He just has an opinion, which is he thinks that when forced to make this rather difficult choice, that he sees the factors that would lead him to choose to actually finish the war as the likeliest outcome, which is really encouraging because Ambassador Ross is definitely someone who knows a lot more about this kind of stuff than any of the rest of us do. So please God, we get some peace in the mix here. Let's go ahead over, and incidentally, new elections too wouldn't be so terrible. Matt.
So from what I've heard, if Trump really wants to deal with Saudi Arabia, but Saudi Arabia will only do a deal if there is some movement toward a Palestinian state that is more definite than has been in the past. And Netanyahu has expressed no interest in that.
Yeah.
So have you heard anything to suggest that Saudi Arabia...
Has softened on that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the impression that Saudi Arabia really cares about the Palestinians that much. But I think that their people have a emotional tie and an investment there. And I assume the Saudi Arabian government is worried about that. So is there something that you've heard that suggests that maybe they'd be prepared to accept something that is, I don't want to say a fig leaf, but it's like a little tiny step that's not really irretrievable or anything?
Yeah. That is obviously the, I guess in the old days it was the $64,000 question. Nowadays it has to be the $64 billion question. In any case, Matt's point about, it is true that before the war, if you go back to before October 7, 2023, the Saudis, the reason Hamas was itching in Iran as well to engage Israel in war, even at the vast expense that has been wrought upon Gaza, was to prevent Israel and the Saudis from making common cause. And at that time, without a doubt, the Saudis, at least in their public languaging, were tying it to hopes, reasonable prospects for a Palestinian state. So all along, it always kind of felt like this doesn't all add up, because certainly this Israeli government, the one that he was having the conversations with, that the Saudis were having the conversations with, I mean, there'd be no way to make a Palestinian state with this government. I described for you the parties that are in this government. They are fiercely anti-Arab and are mostly like ultra-nationalists who want to just have all the land be Israel. So they're not even interested in occupation. They're interested in annexation, and all of it's just Israel, and the Palestinians can lump it.
One state.
So, one state. Yeah, a one-state solution that is not the kind of one-state solution some of you may be dreaming of. So, that has always been, I'll say all along, it's been a non-fit. I mean, I've always kind of wondered, why would Iran and Hamas be so convinced that that the danger of the normalization of relationship is looming, if that's a condition of it, because you're not going to get that from this Israeli government. The reason why I suspect that they were willing to go to war despite that is because they don't really trust, like you said, the Saudis don't really care about the Palestinians all that much. They probably want the wealth and the influence that would come with normalization of relationships with both Israel and the United States.
And a military deal and a
And
security
all
deal.
of it, all of it. They were probably willing, and they've probably rightly felt like, at the very least, we have to be speaking the language of what good Arab would do business with Israel unless they were going to do right by the Palestinians. And so I myself have never really trusted that part of the Saudis' shtick. The Saudis are, as you said, they're not like known for their humanitarianism, at least the leaders. I don't want to speak of the Saudi people, but MBS is, I think, a relatively proven, brutal leader, and I doubt that there's all that much concern. If there was all that much concern, then Benjamin Netanyahu, if he was forced to only govern with a coalition such as the one that he got elected with in Saudis, I guess, no deal. And yet things were continuing to advance. So I would imagine there's probably going to be a lot of empty words about the future of the Palestinians and self-determination and self-governance on their own land and blah, blah, blah. And meanwhile, money and politics and power and military reach and regional control probably matter a lot more. That's my supposition. You may next. Go ahead, Shelley.
Yeah, okay.
Diane, we're going to just pass the microphone over to Diane so she can go after Shelley.
So the far-right organizations that you've mentioned, Shas, United Torah, the Kahanis, et cetera, what prevents them from being united? It sounds like they're still separated. So is there a common, I know what the common denominator is, but why aren't they united?
Yeah, the answer is they're naturally united when a government forms.
Right.
They're either going to be together in the government,
Right.
or they're going to be together in the opposition. But it's the same reason why left-leaning parties are not one party, right? In parliamentary systems, people run with very subtle differences from one another. In particular, the difference, say, between Smotrich's party and Ben-Gvir's party is while they stand for really many of the very same things, it is the Ben-Gvir folks who are the direct descendants of Kahana. They're the ones with the pictures of Kahana up in their homes, and the ones who studied his work and whose fathers served in his,
Army.
Militia and all that kind of stuff. So there's subtle differences, and ultimately they end up, at the moment, it's a rare moment where you've got Ben-Gvir over here and the rest of them over here. That is all about posturing, and I can promise you after another election takes place, all those guys are going to end up being together. The one group that I will say sometimes does depart from them is actually Shas.
Mhm.
Shas is interested really only in religious matters. They're interested in the fate of whether ultra-Orthodox Jews have to serve in the military. These are the things that animate them much more than the geopolitics of what happens with the land and the Palestinians and that kind of stuff. The other guys are all going to land together after whenever next election takes place. They will all either be in the government or out of the government, and please God, they will be in the opposition.
So my follow-up question is, if they're so anti-Arab, would they go along with the Abraham Accords?
Yeah, they go along with the Abraham Accords because it's just about, Arabs who are not on our watch helping us to live our lives more profitably.
Well,
But we would, in fact, we love those Arab countries. Let the Palestinians go there. Would be their take.
right, there you go. Thank you.
I just want to say the U.S. has a very large strategic stake in what happens there because we have a very large, and Charlie and I are going back and forth, we can't remember. Our son-in-law is in the military, and he does staging and strategic movement of goods and people.
Yeah.
And he's been furious with the Biden administration because they've basically put the large base that we have, and we keep going back and forth whether it's Saudi Arabia or Qatar, at risk, that he's not supporting that enough. And I think why Trump really, and his son-in-law and all those guys love, are so affectionate to the Saudis and to the Qataris is because we have a huge American strategic base there from which we send out all of our forces in the region. So you really need that because Israel alone cannot defend.
Yeah, America has picked a side in the Sunni Shia
Absolutely.
shtick, and it's definitely with the Sunnis.
But it's the base.
Get closer to the mic.
It's the base in Saudi Arabia or Qatar that's so critical
Right.
to our thinking.
Yeah, there's definitely, Diana's absolutely right. I was kind of, even with a lengthy presentation, kind of going in shorthand and all that. I wanted to make sure that everybody at every different kind of jumping off point in terms of understanding of Israeli politics, we would be able to have a conversation, all of us together, about the same thing. And so couldn't include everything, but Diana's absolutely right. There's a lot of reasons why Trump wants this war to end. Number one is it's all in the same way as it was with Reagan and Carter. It's about pantsing Joe Biden, without a doubt. Like, you talked about making peace for years, and I didn't even have to show up. I hadn't showed up yet, and they made peace. Only because they were so terrified that I was about to show up. So there's already, there's some internal American politics, but there's definitely a huge. This is the thing that I think that the American left, including Jews, but more often not of the Jews. There are definitely, even within our congregation, those on the hard left in the Jewish community in America who we're calling for a ceasefire on October 8th, you know. And those who are taking that stance, I've always felt are sort of missing the memo with regard to what's really going on with America's support for Israel. It's not about opposing Palestinian self-determination, even though I don't think that too many American governments have cared very much about Palestinian self-determination, not as much as they should. But that's not the motive. The motive is all about what's good for America, not what's good for Israel. And we Jews should always remember that the both parties, American government's enthusiasm for Israel is not because they love us Jews, or they really care about the wonderful Jewish sites being under Jewish control. It's none of that. It has everything to do with what Diane was just talking about. Israel is an extremely valuable political and military outpost in a very dangerous region of the world. And
intellectual capital, too.
yes, all of it. And then when you start to imagine the region, America having a greater and greater reach, and certainly if Saudi Arabia is added to that mix, already so many other Arab countries are. You add Saudi Arabia for all of its both military, strategic value, and the massive wealth, the massive access to oil. These are the reasons that the United States is a big fan of. And so when they stand up and they talk about they're all a bunch of terrorists and these guys are just trying to be peace-loving democracy people, blah, blah, blah. That's not what they're really talking about. The reason both parties, whenever they've been in power, have been supporters of Israel is because it's really good for the United States that Israel's there. And on some level, thank God. Although, I say that as a Jew and as a rabbi, an American Jew. But I'll add, sometimes that leads, as is going on right now, and it's been going on for a long time, frankly. It's not just about Trump. A lot of America looking the other way with regard to Israel's own excesses. Very few American governments, really none, have been willing to stand up to Israel in its greatest excesses. Biden tried on some level, and look at the reward he got for that. Not only did all of the folks who want Israel and the United States to have a strong relationship, they all turned against, they're like, Biden is, worse for Israel, worse for the U.S.-Israel alliance, but all the left turned on him too. They're all like, Genocide Joe, right? And so there was nothing to be gained, unfortunately, politically. He was trying on principle to hold this diabolical Israeli coalition to account, and he ended up winning the support of basically nobody on either side of the divide as a result of that. American politics plays a huge role here. Let's pass the microphone over. Gotta have a microphone.
3 words.
Gotta have a microphone. Those 3 words, then you got a microphone.
Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
Trump wants that.
There's also the ego. That's a fair peace, right? I mean, imagine if peace is made and there's no Palestine, but there's peace made between America, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. He might actually be able to make a swing in getting a Nobel Peace Prize. And if you're laughing at that, just remember, some people who really didn't deserve peace prizes have won Nobel Peace Prizes. Oh, for sure, without a doubt. Yeah. Into the mic.
So let me give you a counter argument in terms of where Trump is going to be. Kushner has expressed interest in real estate on the Mediterranean, where Gaza is.
Yes.
And, okay, so Saudi Arabia may be committed to a Palestinian state, but it doesn't have to, is it a contiguous area? And does that contiguous area include Gaza, which needs to be rebuilt at this point? So I'm, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
You get a
so,
deal on
so,
Gaza real estate
so the
right
question
now.
is, if you have a choice between a Nobel Peace Prize and a lot of real estate on the Mediterranean, which way do you go?
Yeah, so this is another factor Charlie's right to bring up. It is a matter of public record, it has been for years, that Jared Kushner has some commercial real estate visions for the Gaza Strip. And that would just, can you not picture Trump communist as we're speaking here today? It's not hard to imagine. And so, and obviously, as people who care about peace and who want Israel to be the kind of country that lives peaceably alongside its neighbors, that's been the dream. And some may say that's an illusion, it's hopeless. But as you've heard me say many times, Israel's been at peace with the Egyptians for many decades now, and that seemed absolutely unthinkable 5 years before it happened. Absolutely unthinkable. So I'm not here to say that Israel could not live in existence peacefully alongside a Palestinian state. In fact, if anything, I think the fact of the war makes it likelier, not less likely. Even though, obviously, emotions, the hatred on both sides is at its highest level now, but how do you think all the Egyptians and the Israelis felt about one another after the 1973 war? It wasn't a warm and fuzzy time, and yet by 1978, there they are, with a right-wing Israeli Prime Minister, Menachem Begin, who was a part of the Irgun, which was a terrorist organization. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that Menachem Begin, before he was Prime Minister, who made peace at Camp David, was a terrorist and killed people the way terrorists kill people. Crazier things have happened than Israel making peace with the Palestinians and a Palestinian state being born. The issue is, yes, what qualifies as satisfying the Saudis' lack of a really sincere interest? Maybe we can, yes, have some separate Bantustans that can masquerade as Palestine.
Yeah,
will not satisfy the Palestinian people, that's for sure. Please get closer to the mic.
Sorry, what I was questioning is whether or not Trump would in fact favor continuation of the war.
Oh, I see your question. Okay, I didn't
I'm asking a
understand that.
different question.
So, yeah, continue the war until you basically just make Gaza a piece of your personal property. Right. That's a good question. I hadn't thought of that as a potential factor that he could make an argument. You're right. I hope he does not make this argument.
Yeah, I'm not.
But I understand you're not.
I'm not advocating.
You're not advocating for it. But the argument that I think Charlie's making here is while Netanyahu is sitting there fearful of losing his coalition and does not want to go to a new election and is afraid of the public reckoning about October 7th, might he be able to try to schmeichel Trump into, look at this great real estate I've got for you and for your son-in-law, and brings him images, renderings of Trump communists. And it has even bigger letters of Trump than on any other Trump building has ever had. This can be all yours if only we get rid of those dastardly Palestinians and the ones who are, Hamas. And we just got to get the Gazans out of Gaza, and then it's all yours at a discount price. That may be very appealing, at least as something to try during the 6 weeks. Who knows what they're discussing while we're having this discussion here.
You just rename it the American Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah. The American Mediterranean Sea. Yes, there you go. Along with Panama Canal and the Gulf of America and all this. Yes. Let's get a microphone down to Matt.
I just have a question about the ceasefire.
Yes.
So my understanding is Hamas negotiated very specifically about who the people were going to be who were released
Correct.
from Israeli
Right.
jails.
The Palestinians can go back.
Yes. But I've never really understood how it worked, which Israeli hostages were going to be released. I think I heard that it was supposed to be women, children, elderly people first.
Correct.
But I also have the impression that there's no list of who's alive and who's dead.
That is correct.
And so,
But there is a list of who the 33 are to be. What we don't know is the order in which the 33 would come out. We do have the 33.
so we have names of 33 people, but we don't know if they're alive or dead.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
We have the supposition that most, or hopefully, please not all, might be alive because one of the conditions of the deal was that alive was prioritized over dead. Please God, there are 33 that are alive. And it's at least these 33 and maybe some more, but we just don't know. I would suppose if Israel was able to put that bomb in Ismail Haniyeh's room years before he went in the room in Tehran, and then certainly as regards the public record, what we know is 33 names have been given to us. They do prioritize, they're not exclusively women, young children, and elderly people. They're not exclusively all that, but certainly the majority of the 33 fit into that category. And I think we are operating under the presumption / prayer that they are all coming home alive. And time will tell.
Okay. The other thing is that every time they have these negotiations where they get a dead body in return for 100 Palestinians or whatever the number is, I always think that it seems very duplicitous to talk about how Israelis dehumanize Palestinians when, like, Hamas basically says, you know, one Israeli life is worth 1,000.
There's been a lot of times where Hamas and other jihadist leaders, not only even having to do with the Palestinians, yes, having to do with the Palestinians, you know, Islamic Jihad, other jihadi groups in the Palestinian territories, but also beyond that, you know, your Al-Qaeda's and your ISIS's and this kind of thing, where they talk about how the Jews value life. That's their weak spot. Like, you can get over on the Jews because they care about life. They're right about us. And so you can get a trade where, you know, it's 100 to 1, and that you can get a Yahya Sinwar released along with 999 other people just to get Gilad Shalit home. They do know our weak spot, and that is, they're actually not timid about saying that out loud. Good hearing. Let's get the mic. Oh, yes, the mic. That's it. Smart hearing.
These articles were written before the inauguration.
Correct.
And I have been, because of a writing obligation I have, been reading all of the executive orders. And what's less well known is that executive orders are then followed by explanatory ways in which they're carried out, much like regulations carry out statutes. There are writings that will describe the executive orders. And I'm almost done. And I wanted your thought on the big picture of what all of this means. You alluded to the American Jews and their views of the Middle East. The executive orders are much, much, much scarier than most of the public knows. And he used in his inauguration the phrase manifest destiny, which was not an accident. What is your thought about where the Middle East and what's happening now is going to play out in the bigger picture of the next 6 months to a year of American action? Seems to me that the slew of executive orders was done primarily so that some would slip through without much coverage, that the American people would be overwhelmed and scared, that the American Jews would stop caring as much about Israel as the rest of the world, where it's obvious from those orders that, and regarding his foreign policy team, that Russia is basically just Israel over that part of the world. The relationship between Putin and Ukraine bears a striking resemblance to Ukraine being the Gazans. And my concern and my question for you is it possible that if he gets his way, that we are heading toward a long-term 50, 60, 70-year period of extreme right-wing authoritarianism where Israel will end up being the bad guy? That the Middle East, the Palestinians are going to be just wiped out. Because after all, I don't think that economics or politics is as much an issue as just pure racism. I just think that there's just a racist element to all of this regarding the Palestinians, just like the Ukrainians are viewed in Russia. And to me, Trump is so transactional and so authoritarian that all he really cares about is, like you say, the beachfront property that he may own.
Let me try to answer the question. And this is actually, this is where we'll conclude, because we're getting close to the top of the hour. And it actually is a logical place for us to conclude. Obviously, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do have an opinion, and I do have had them before this election. They're not specific to Donald Trump being president, although you've named some things that certainly create riper conditions. But yeah, I can't remember whether it was this High Holy Days or the previous one, but I think I actually said from the Bima my fear of Israel turning into a Jewish Iran. Anybody hear me say those words? I think I did. Yeah. At least it was in a draft. Maybe I got too intimidated and took it out of the draft. Yeah, exactly. It's possible. It is possible. I don't think I took it out though. I mean, I think I did. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to the drawing board. I'm going to see if it's there. I think I did say it. I know at the very least I talked about the danger of Israel turning into the kind of theocracy that you see in the Islamic world, you see in Iran. And it would be an Israel that would be very, very hard for American Jews who are not themselves ultra-Orthodox to support. It just would not feel like anything remotely like what you've imagined Israel being. And that is an actual danger. I will say this, and this is it's a harrowing way to conclude, but Ben-Gvir, it's not a coincidence that he was the first one out. He is absolutely convinced there is more power for him up ahead, not less. He doesn't think that he caught this one lightning in a bottle and slipped into an Israeli coalition after his ideological predecessors were literally blacklisted. They could not have power. They were not allowed in the government starting in the mid-1980s. Well, now here we are, a full generation and a half later, and he's the head of national, I forget the exact title, security, yes. He runs the police. You would think that's, victory is mine, right? I'm a lunatic, and I actually run the police, and I'm riding a herd in the West Bank. He believes there are more votes still to be garnered, or maybe you do it the way Hitler once did it, right? You have less votes, but you have enough votes to where together you can cobble together the kind of coalition where you have enough votes to be the leading vote getter. So maybe we get Likud's votes down into the 20s, and we can get ourselves up into the 20s. And maybe they can't succeed in putting together 61, but I can, because I'll do business with all these people. It remains to be seen, but I definitely think we need to be watching. My concern is not only for what the American government may be up to, and that's true of any American government, right, left, or center. It's about this lurch the Israeli people definitely have lurched rightward after the Second Intifada, where you had all of the suicide bombings, and you couldn't go out anywhere. Pizzerias were exploding, and the bus station was exploding, and the restaurant was. It was just a constant concern. There, not surprisingly, that was the end of the Oslo Accords and the end of that deep Israeli will to take a chance on peace. Another reason why it's just not politically saleable. I wish there were a larger number of Israelis who are itching for who see that the long-term security of Israel is in fact achieved by creating a Palestinian state that's independent of them. It's the way you keep the demographics working. It's the way that you keep the state Jewish. There are so many reasons security-wise, even if you didn't ideologically want peace. I don't know where, in this room there's a diversity of views about Israel-Palestine. But there's a very strong security-only argument to be made for making peace with the Palestinians. It's the same argument that led Ariel Sharon to unilaterally withdraw from Gaza. The numbers continue to march in the direction of a Jewish minority governing a Arab majority. And that alone, even if the kind of state that Gary is fearful of, is going to be, this I know I said on High Holy Days some number of years ago. You'd have to roll back the clock several years before, where I said I really do believe that for most American Jews, the religion of democracy is more important to them than the religion of Judaism. Not you who are seated, you're coming to study with your rabbi once a month. That's not you. But although maybe it is you, it's certainly intention. You know, I will say this. We Jews know that democracy was a really, really important part of our both surviving and thriving. And so we come honestly by our belief in democracy. And it's the reason why so many Jews are up in arms about what the future holds for the democracy in the United States. So already it would be difficult enough once the numbers clearly and conclusively demonstrated that a Jewish minority was ruling over a Arab majority, such that there's no debate, it's an apartheid state. I mean, real tough to plan Temple Israel trips, to congregations like this one. Real tough. Add the factors that Gary's talking about. You yourself will really struggle, no matter how much, and we all do, I think, feel some natural affinity for the Jews whose lives are on the line on the one piece of land that we know, if things should ever turn bad for us, wherever we might live, that's a place we could go. It's a very real concern, this business of a Jewish Iran. And so, watch carefully, advocate loudly. Great to be with all of you today. Thanks. Yeah. Which Alan just said, you're talking about the difference between being an American Jew and a Jewish American. Some of you, I'm glad to see the camera is still on. I hope it doesn't turn off before I get this little story out. Some of you were there on November 7th, 2002. The bylaws of Leobeck Temple dictate that a senior rabbi cannot be appointed by a search committee or even the board of trustees. An open plenum of the membership has to approve the appointment of a senior rabbi. It's not the case at every synagogue. So of course I learned this after I was long into the process. Had no idea. So I thought, wow, the search committee selected me and the board approved it. I guess I'm the rabbi. And they're like, well, you're gonna need to come out here on I was in New York, I lived in New York at the time. We're gonna fly you out on November 7th. There's gonna be a gathering that's gonna look a lot like the High Holidays at Leobeck Temple, before your first High Holidays. We're gonna open up the back door and we're gonna have the sanctuary and social hall, kind of like the Boring Company did it, but the bima was still in place. And we're gonna put microphones in the aisles and you'll make a little presentation and then it's time for the real search committee, that is the membership of Leobeck Temple, to ask whatever questions they want to ask of you. That was a fascinating night in my life and in the lives of those of you who were here for it. Some of you were in fact there that night. I know that. I remember some of you being there that night. And what I will say is this. It was actually a really great conversation. And at the end, I can tell you exactly what the last question was because I never got to answer it. I don't remember who asked it. That I don't remember. And somebody may remember. Somebody stood up at the microphone and said, Rabbi, are you an American Jew or a Jewish American? Are you an American or a Jew first? That was the question. And of course, I started dissembling. I was buying myself some time, using some words to buy a moment or two, trying to figure out how do I answer this without like literally pouring kerosene all over myself and taking on a match. And all of a sudden, at my side is my predecessor, our senior rabbi emeritus of blessed memory, Sandy Reagans, stands up, unsolicited, steps up to the podium, grabs the microphone away. It's like I can't really say anymore. He's watching this lovely young rabbi try his best, and he's like, you know, back when I was interviewing to be the sabbatical rabbi for Rabbi Leonard Bierman, before I even became the assistant rabbi of this temple, much less its senior rabbi, I was being interviewed, and he mentioned the name of somebody who I never knew, who was a big rough and tumble leader of the temple back in the 60s. And he said, so-and-so stood up at that meeting and said, somebody else asked the question, are you a Jew or an American first? And then the rough and tumble guy, who I don't remember, I never knew, literally interrupted me as I was attempting to answer the question, the way I'm interrupting you right now, Ken, and said, if you attempt to answer that question, you are a fool. Everybody busted up laughing. Sandy put his hands on my shoulders, turned my body to the exit. I walked out of the room, went back to hang with him in his office, and I was invited back into the room after having been elected the senior rabbi of Leobeck Temple. So that was the last moment before I was elected. God bless you, Rabbi Reagans, in memory. Yes. Yes. Could be. I knew Gordon. Gordon Bodek I knew. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Wanted to make the point. You are a fool. Well, I definitely. No, you can't. Yeah. Well, that's what he was saying is that you can't answer that question. Half of the people in the room are going to think you're wrong by definition. So I never answered the question. Don't ask it to me now. I'm not going to answer it. But the way I honor Rabbi Reagans' memory is he shut me up that day, and I am planning to stay shut up about that one. So there you have it. We are done for all of you who are online. Have a great afternoon.